Good evening, everyone. I'm going to be presenting to you, but obviously if you want to ask questions or heckle as I go along, do. Because although an expert, I have only some projects I've done, and each of you has different knowledge, abilities, worked on other peculiar projects. Something I say, well, this is the way to light showcases. You might say, we tried that in 3 years ago, and this went wrong, and there's this peculiarity. So all that sort of information is very useful to tell everyone else. So I say heckle gently. That's fine. So LG8 is in its printed form, which is 80-odd pages of wonderful, wonderful writing, photographs, and everything else. Committee slaved away producing it, so do read it. As I say, if you remember, you can download it on the portal and have a look, browse through it. And if you really want a nice foldy paper version, you can get those as well. So, whichever you want. So the basic principle of our lighting guide is that beautiful objects in beautiful buildings deserve beautiful lighting. It doesn't always work like that, as some of the museums I've seen over the last few months have shown me. But we hope to help educate people who have read the guide or listen to talks like this. Now, I'm not going to go through page by page and tell you all about it. I'm going to very briefly structure my talk on the chapter headings in the document. Some I'll sort of skate over very rapidly, and some I'll pick out points. But again, if I miss things out and you're particularly interested in how to light 17th century swords, shout and I'll try my best. We'll see how we get on. So the first chapter is all about the lighting principles. Very basic, what we're trying to do, viewing conditions, trying to inform all of us about what goes on in museums and galleries and historic buildings. Because everyone who reads this guide will be reading it for a different reason. Some people will be curators who have an interest in lighting, some people will be the people who install and maintain the lighting, others will be designers, architects, museum designers, all those sorts of people, which is a sort of problem for those drafting the guide. It's got to be written to give enough knowledge to assist to aim people in the right direction without boring them rigid if they know it already, or just going completely over their heads if they know nothing. So we try and sort of step people through it. Normally each section starts off simple and gets more difficult. So you can skip it when it gets to the simple bits and whiz through to the difficult bits. Viewing conditions in museums and galleries and historic houses are often quite difficult. I was over at the Walsall Museum this morning, doing my touristy bit, and one particular gallery they had there, the lighting levels were so visibly low, I could hardly discern the colours of the images being shown. So I hope no one's here from Walsall Gallery. It's wonderful, really nice gallery. There might even be a photograph in here of it, I think, possibly. Can't remember now. I tend to dabble with my talks as I drive up and come up with the train, so they tend to vary slightly. I don't follow scripts very well. Next chapter, lighting the interior display area. Because lighting museums and galleries, they're all different. Some are boxes, like Walsall. I've mostly been to the Walsall Gallery. Box, basically. Nice, very nice building. Nice views from the top and all that sort of thing. Views out through windows, can be good and bad. And others are ornate listed structures. If you think of the Birmingham City, the Museum and Art Gallery here, it has some very ornate decorative rooms. It has very simple rooms. It has rooms in between. So obviously in some rooms you want to show a bit of the lighting to bring out features in the architecture. You're walking into what's beautiful, airy, barrel-vaulted Victorian gallery, isn't it lovely? And here are the objects. So it's getting that balance right can be tricky in some cases. So we try and guide people through that. Some buildings are in themselves the object to be lit. You go into some places and you're lighting the beautiful historic interior. There's some ruins that are lit very well. Because people go and visit the ruin. There's no furniture or painting or artwork in it. So each one's different. And we try and guide people through those choices. Now the interior display area chapter goes through daylight in the space. Some places have a lot of daylight, some are black boxes, which is the term for a gallery space that has no daylight, which it might be a white box, but it's called a black box. So there we go. Confusing already. We go through electric lighting in various forms, how to combine, within reason, daylight and electric lighting, because you get some galleries that are like this room, where there's side lighting from one side or two sides. Some have roof lights, various forms and shapes and descriptions, and it's how to get the two to blend with the electric lighting, and how to put in dimming systems so that one can take over from the other on a dull day or in the evenings. We talk about access and security. Very important to make sure the building works out of hours as well. Historic interiors, very delicate, some of them. Some where you cannot just stick lights where you want. My most difficult one was the Divinity School at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, which is the earliest purpose-built lecture theatre in Britain, theoretically. When we went there, the secretary of the Bodleian showed us around. He said, we have our Magna Carta, and we've got all these fantastic documents which are here for the tourists. And it's a beautiful barrel-vaulted, ornate room. But we also have functions here. We have formal dinners, and we have this, that, and the other. So we want to put new, exciting lighting in that's fine for manuscripts, but fine for formal dinners and occasional slight parting. But you can't attach any lights to the ceiling, or the walls, or the floor. So after a short while thinking about lights hung from helium balloons, we did tackle it with lights that sort of clip in and wires that follow down into heating grills and things. So it can get a bit extreme in historic interiors. National Trust properties are a little more sensible usually, but can get a bit weird at times. Temporary gallery spaces, the sort of flexible spaces, again, getting that flexibility without spending a fortune is again a balancing act. We try and take you through some of the options on a new build where you've got an existing gallery. If it's a big refurb, again you can follow those same rules. Events, corporate entertaining, a very big feature of a lot of gallery spaces these days. And the very important shopping cafe to bring in the revenue. This is one historic interior. That some of these photographs I'll show you are my projects and some are other people's, and I'll try and identify which is which in case you want to ask questions about them. This is Chatsworth, not too far away. We've been working on Chatsworth for 5 odd years, slowly, space by space. It's a big building. This is the Great Stair. Historic interior, still needs lighting. You still don't want people falling down the stairs. You still want people to appreciate various objects, statuary, beautiful painted ornate ceiling. What you don't want is people being blinded by lights. They want a few historic lights which people expect to see, because you need to see some source of light. Even though nearly every light in this space is hidden from sight, it would be a bit weird if there was no visible source of light. So, and we do this in a lot of National Trust properties. There is a dimly glowing chandelier in the middle, which is not doing very much, it's just gently glowing, and there's little concealed spotlights hidden behind pelmets, behind pieces of fixed furniture and things like that, which do most of the work to light the dark corners, etc. I mean, here it's fairly simple, it's all LED, and there's little miniature tiddly spotlights concealed behind beams and above, over mantles, above doorways and things like that. So that sneaky lights here and there. This one is Leeds, well the one on the left is Leeds City Museum, which was done about 5 or 6 years ago now, I think. And this is an example of corporate entertainment space. This big circular space in the middle of the museum is designed for everything on the floor to be removed. So it can be one big space. They can, I think, have about 200 and something people seated for dinners, and for presentations they can have more, they can have product launches, all that sort of stuff. So the lighting has to be able to deal with visitors coming up and sitting looking at 5 screens hung in space, looking at this giant map of leads, viewing odd objects scattered around, bits of historic tiling, all sorts of things that are there. So it has to serve a lot of purposes. And this just about make out, we put in a huge curved suspended structure, quite lightweight one, and that carries an adaptable spotlighting system. So when all the tables are out, there's a spotlight and putting emphasis onto each table, things like that. This is the Walker Art Gallery in Liverpool. We did that about 8 or 9 years ago. And this is an example of the shop, typical sort of weird shop ticketing sort of space. Again, very important. It's differently important to the lighting big museum objects, but you need to sell things in the shop, you need to get people ticketing information, all that sort of thing. This particular space is designed as a very adaptable space, and when I went back last year, it's completely different. It's been rearranged, but the lighting's been moved to compensate. And all it is a simple track system with different sorts of lights doing different purposes over the desk, lighting, merchandise, etc. Obviously each space is very different and the lighting has to be tailored appropriately. Oh, here we are. That was about 3 or 4 years after we originally put it in, and again lights have been shifted about. So a new purpose, an information point, so purposes change. This is the Rylands Library in Manchester. We did this with Giffords a decade ago. And again, it's their main foyer, ticketing, shop, cafe. So it's a completely multi-purpose space, which has sort of gentle background lighting, covers a multitude of sins, and then spotlighting. They can move around when stuff moves about the space. And that seems to have served them well, which is good. Now, the next chapter is sort of a key chapter, which is how to light the exhibits, the objects. Now, these vary massively from museum to museum, gallery to gallery, whether they're classic works of art, modern works of art, beautiful sculptures made out of cardboard and string, you name it, it's got to be lit in some way. So initially we start off by talking about spotlights, generally spotlights are wall washing for wall mounted or centrally displayed objects. And we give lots of diagrams of typical arrangements and the variations you can find. And again, each gallery space is different in terms of height, width and shape. A converted mill one day or a black box experience type place the next. But we show problems with putting the lights too high or too low, trying to get them into positions where they light past viewers, not so when you're standing, look at an object, the light's behind you and you just cast a nice shadow of your body. Lights from the side or coming over your shoulders sort of thing, and not having the lights so far back that you get reflections from paintings or glass mounted objects. So we take you all through those sort of geometric situations so that you can plan out where to run tracks, where to put fixed lights and things like that. So it's a very practical guide. And again, we talk about where we're trying to light objects in the centre of a room. You can put them, if you try and be economic, there's a bit of value engineering, and do we really need 3 runs of track? Can't we make do with 2? The answer is sometimes no, because you end up lighting across the space at such a high angle, you're dazzling people trying to look at a dark sculpture and things like that. So it's often better where the budget allows to put in extra tracks, extra rows of spotlights, whatever, to give you more flexibility. Obviously there's a balance with cost and clashing with other services and all those problems. Again, with freestanding, often in spaces this sort of size, it may not be on day one petitioned, but go back 2 years later and they put in a zigzag wall unit down the middle so they can put extra paintings on, or the temporary exhibition, or there's all sorts of things. And again, you want to make sure you're not lighting at such a high angle, you're dazzling people on the opposite sides of partitions or structures or mechanical whatever. So it depends what turns up. Moving on, access and maintenance. We go through all the practicalities because I see many galleries where you look at them. Well, it's not so bad now, we've got LEDs, but certainly in the days of tungsten halogen spotlighting, when you walk into a gallery and you see tungsten halogen spotlights above staircases or an inaccessible location, you sort of groan, especially as usually half of them are out, because generally they've worked out that it's so difficult to get to them, we'll wait until 3/4 have blown before we scaffold the staircase and replace them. At least with LEDs you can think, well, we'll have to do that once a decade or once every 12, 15 years or whatever. Well, access for maintenance is still important even when you're, even with LEDs, because occasionally one will fail, and it is certainly sensible to think about how they all get happened. This is the Summerley Industrial Museum up near Glasgow. We did 7 or 8 years ago, I think. Has some fairly big objects. This is an old mine winding machine the size of this room. And obviously if you have a spotlight up above it, you're not really going to get to it unless you hire in a really big hydraulic overreach unit, which will dent your museum budget quite a bit for maintenance. So all the track lighting we put in is set back. So it's set back along routes that run round all the main objects, because we designed with the museum designers the routes to get that hydraulic platform around the whole building. So everything is designed around turning circles, so this truck can trundle around to get up 6-7 metres up and to get over some of the exhibition structures where necessary. It's quite fun driving one of those. It's very enjoyable. Setting up the lighting. One reason I always make sure you can get at the lights is I'm nearly always the last one up the night before the building opens, aiming all the spotlights. So I want to make sure it can be done safely. Now, backgrounds and contrasts. This is something that normally you have to deal with in conjunction with the exhibition designers or the curators or the architects sometimes, to try and determine what the whole scene is going to look like. So sometimes you have no control over it. So if the interior designer wants to paint the wall black behind some black objects, you've got a problem. So you need to talk through these issues, or at least be aware of them. So when the architect says, oh, we really want that wall black, and you have to explain you're putting some nice fairly black objects against it and it's not going to really work. At least you can talk from a point of informed knowledge. This is an example of a deliberately dark space. Criticising the exhibition designers here, very good ones. This is the International Slavery Museum up in Liverpool. We did a few years back, I can't remember now. It's deliberately dark because the whole reason for it is you go into darkness. It's a dark, it's not quite menacing, but it's all about slavery and the slave trade and dragging people from one country to another and imprisoning them in ships and all that sort of thing. So it is a tight environment. So the lighting still has to pick out objects so you can view them, but you have a dark environment, so people are dark adapted, which is quite useful. We still need to put enough light onto objects to bring out colours and detail, which is why, we'll mention this a bit later on, but the minimum lighting for good visual perception is 50 lux, whatever you're lighting. Because if it gets much below that, for most people, they start to lose the ability to perceive detail, and the colour perception starts dropping off. So that's why 50 lux is sort of a bottom threshold. And so I'll pick that up a bit later when we talk about conservation. Now moving from a dark environment to a lighter one, This is over in Rochdale. This is the Rochdale Touchstones exhibition we did about a decade ago. And this is an old Victorian building, and it's much lighter in presentation. In fact, it had to have these big screens put over windows to try and reduce the amount of light coming in from, deliberately designed in to reduce the daylight penetration. So it was a controlled lit environment, but a quite light, so nice light walls, nice light ceilings, a sort of very white box. But still, all the lighting levels are controlled and contained, so as you look around the space, nothing is too bright or too dark. That's the objects you're looking at. So you can see the detail in every space, including these sort of background images. I mean, certainly with background, general objects like this, you can let the light fall off a bit on those. Experimentation and mock-ups. Now, when you've got the time or a willing client, or sometimes money, it is very, very sensible to try and experiment a bit, mock up, demonstrate lights to a client. If you're trying to say why you need, and if this was a gallery space and the quantity surveyor say, oh, why can't we just put 2 tracks in, it's fine. I know what I'm talking about, I'm the quantity surveyor. You can say, well, actually putting a 3rd track in means we can, if you've got an object here, you can light it from this side, you can light it from that side. Getting up on a step ladder, carefully and sensibly and safely, and putting a spotlight up and showing the client or curator or architect or whoever what the problem is about pointing a spotlight across a room when you're walking in, you can demonstrate that very quickly and very clearly. And again, if you're trying to experiment with how to light a particularly awkward object, again, you can stand up and you can use the spotlight. Or at Chatsworth, that great stair, we spent a day experimenting. So we spent a day with little tiddly spotlights, standing in corners, holding them up here, holding them up there, putting a tower up and standing up on the balcony with spotlights above door. So it's just working out where you want it. Because sometimes, although we use computer programs to predict the lighting effect, getting 3 spotlights up on a wooden board, screwed onto a wooden board, and aiming them and working out, well, actually, if we have a spot beam over there and a medium and a wide beam, that looks pretty good on the ceiling, and if we duplicate it on the other side, that's going to be fantastic. So it's very practical, fairly simple. Nearly every manufacturer, if you say, I've got this nice prestigious or big project, will say, oh yeah, we'll give you samples, or lend you samples. So easy to do. Usually.
Did you decide what colour temperature of the light source to use? Is it just something to see?
Generally, it's generally about 3,000 K, 2,700 sometimes in the sort of stately, homey, where you're trying to create a sort of domestic feel. So a lot of National Trust properties are in that sort of tungsten halogen warm side. Where you're doing a whole new building, you could pick 4,000, you could pick 3,000. As long as it's consistent, especially in one space, it really doesn't matter. 4,000 is slightly more efficient in LED terms, although that difference is disappearing very, very rapidly. But generally, I'd say avoid hideous LEDs like these, but which are probably about 5,000 or something. Odd, but there we go. I say most demos are simple. Again, at Chatsworth, here the guy is about to abseil over the side of Chatsworth to set up some temporary demo lighting for me. Down at ground level it's much simpler. It's just a few samples dotted along the side of the driveway. But doing this is again very useful in terms of showing a client, mock up one corner and say, here's what it looks like, you can change the colours, you can do this, you can make it rose, you can make it green, you can do what you want. And it will be the same on the other side, honest. So as long as some clients will say, well, it's dark over there, you say, yeah, that's because we've only got 3 floodlights and there will be 8 eventually, you've just got to use your imagination, but it will all look like that bit. So once you get over that, they're fine. And then you can say, yeah, and you can then talk to the architect and say, look, it's going to be here, and get the various people, the groundsmen over and say, well, how are we going to fix it? How can we run the cabling? Where can we trench? It turned out they got rare fungus in the grass. We can't dig in the grass and all sorts of strange things. But you can work all that out with a real demo rather than doing it all on drawings. You do need to dress up warm because this is the middle of winter, of course, when houses are shut to the public. Great fun. So yeah, some demos can be big. Where you talk about daylight, there are a number of artificial skies, and you can see these are all lights in a big dome. The back of the LG8 has a list of where there are still artificial skies that you can hire. So if you've got a model, and this is sort of a 1 to 10 scale model, this is not one of mine, and I can't for the life of me remember where it is. Don't know, sorry. But you do a 1 to 10 scale model, you take the model in, you stick it on a desk, turn all the lights on, and you can peer in through the window, open the door and peer in like little dolls' houses. Great fun. Clients love it. You can peer in with little camera scopes. You can also have most guys have a sun that can move around on a track, so you can literally say, well, this is what it looks like in early morning in winter, and this is what it looks like in the middle of summer when the sun's at its highest, and you can work out what's going on. You can also do a computer simulation very well, but it's quite fun doing it this way. So you can do it both ways. Computer simulation is great for doing variations, especially on a new, and this is a fixed old building. With a new build, obviously, you can try out different configurations of roof light, different configurations of louvers. You can just do a computer run. Didn't work. Oh, there's a bit of sunlight coming in midsummer. We'll tweak the louvers. Do it again. Oh, that's better. No, it's a bit dark in winter now. You can fiddle very easily. Sometimes doing a model is great for a client. You can just do a model. Architects usually love it. Sometimes they make them. And then you can take it to a sky. You can all walk around. You can all poke things. It's great fun. Now, an important area is material degradation. That's how things fade or materially become damaged. If you've been to stately homes, National Trust properties, you'll probably have seen occasionally ancient fabrics, curtains, chairs where you think, oh, that chair's a bit ropey, it's all fallen to pieces, why haven't they repaired it? Sometimes it's wear by people sitting on it. Sometimes it's daylight that causes the threads to disintegrate. So it's a photochemical reaction. And if you look at often curtains, the one edge on the daylit side, on the window side, will have faded quite quickly. But then also in really old ones, you'll see it starting to come like modern cut jeans. The threads are all going in one direction. So they sort of start sagging. Very common. So certainly with textiles and objects like that, you've got to be very, very careful in lighting total amount of light they get. And obviously once they've got to that stage of falling to pieces in a stately home, it's really past their best. And it's back to the conservation studio to be restitched and repaired and things like that. Obviously when you talk about modern interiors, you want to start with a good conservation regime, good light monitoring, etc. And that's something that has to be discussed with the conservators or curators in each museum or gallery. So the guide takes you through light, what it does, the damage it can do, takes you to conservation categories, which I'll explain in a second, because they've changed over the last few years. Light visibility, 50 lux minimum, effects on light material, factors affecting destructive effects, goes through all those sorts of things, and how to reduce by filtering, time dependence, movement detectors to try and stop lights being on when not necessary. All those very practical issues are covered. Now the big difference between this and the old LG8 from a decade ago is the lighting categories have changed slightly. There used to be 3 levels which were very vulnerable, slightly vulnerable and not vulnerable, or words to that effect. We now have 4. The reason is it's because this bottom one here got this wonderful word, responsivity. You can tell it's an international standard. They've got a whole, a complex word. So don't use exposure or anything like that. It's irresponsive. So if you've got a statue or metalwork or something like that that's not delicately painted, theoretically you can put as much light as you want on it. Certainly if it's outside in the grounds over there, or a statue in the centre of Birmingham, full sunlight on a bronze or a stone sculpture, marble, fine. When you've got them mixed up with other objects, so in this room if we had oil paintings and a bit of textile in the corner and a couple of statues, you wouldn't want to blast light at these white marble statues, because then everyone will turn from the bright white marble statue, look at the painting and go, oh, what a dark and miserable looking painting. Because you've adapted to this bright image here, turn to the dark object. So getting that balance right is important. So generally we say in the guide, if you're lighting statues within an interior, stick to 200. That's a good visibility, certainly for statues and all that sort of thing. You can see everything you need to see. You can see colours well, you can see detail well.
How do you measure the 200 lux on something on a complex surface such as
well, generally, in a sense, very practical. Well, in design, you would try and put a few planes in to work out where it is. And if you were doing demonstrations or trials, you can measure it. But generally, you go around with your light meter. So if this is my beautiful, classic, ancient digital projector, you go around with your light meter and you would check your measure. And you would aim for, if it's a statue, you'd say, oh yeah, as long as it's about 200, that's fine. So, oh, there's 100 down here, 150, 250, that's fine. If you're talking about a painting, obviously I tend to see wander around. Sorry, camera, you couldn't see me there, but that's fine.
So there's nothing there's nothing specific in the guide as to measuring grids or number of...
No, if you want to be that accurate, which some curators, I have had curators who will look at this beautiful painting and they'll say, well, I've got 40 lux in the corner here. I said 50. And you say, well, yeah, there's 50 here. And, it's 50, 55, 52, 55. You've got to be practical about it. And it certainly, again, when we had tungsten halogen lighting, and they would be replaced every year probably in a slight adjustment made, then the lighting would move slightly. With LEDs, if you're lighting a one painting or one print and you've got a variation from 30 here to 70 in the middle, then the middle is going to fade twice as fast. So that could be an issue with certain things. So you've got to be a bit careful. So you generally try, certainly for oil paintings, to get no more than a 3-to-1 variation across any oil painting. Because sometimes in sort of National Trust stately homes, you have picture lights, and good picture lights will do about a 3-to-1, sometimes a 2-to-1, top to bottom. And that's really good. And most of us going into a stately home, looking at a painting that's 2 or 3-to-1, wouldn't perceive it being badly lit. If it's 4, 5, 6-to-1, you would notice the top is bright, the bottom is dark. So 3-to-1's a very good ratio. I'll show you some examples in a moment of that. The low responsivity are things like oil paintings and some other materials. It lists lots and lots of materials for you, and that's about 200 lux typical, and that's based on a normal 3,000 hour opening period for a sort of national standard gallery. So that's 6.5, 7 days a week, 10-ish to 5-ish, that's tops up to about 3,000 hours, allowing a bit for opening up and a bit for closing up and cleaning. So based on that 3,000-ish hours, you get 200 lux, because we're aiming for a total exposure over a year of about 600,000 lux hours. That's simply lux times hours. So 200 lux for 3,000 hours gives you the 600,000 lux hours. You could, if you had a gallery that's only open 5 days a week, and there are some, they open Tuesdays to Saturdays or something like that. In other words, they're maybe open 2,500, 2,000. If you're open for 2,000 hours a year, and you want to keep to this 600,000 lux hours, you could light the objects at 300 lux and have the same fading over generations. Or you could say, we'll stick to 200 lux, and these objects will not just last for 2 generations before there's a noticeable fade, but 3 generations before there's a noticeable fade, because every object that's lit will fade, often statues and stonework and metalwork. So if you light this beautiful shirt, it will fade, even if you light it at 50 lux. So they will degrade through the generations, and you can see that if you look typically at tapestries. Almost every tapestry, old tapestry, not brand new modern tapestry that's Perry's just made, but it is typical trust house, national trust houses, stately homes. The tapestries are very, very faded, and they're stuck. They can only get worse. And very often you look at it and you can see all the foliage. Next time you see a tapestry, look at the leaves and the trees and the grass. It'll generally all be blue. That's because all the yellow has gone, leaving just the blue, because the blue dye is less fugitive. It's a mineral dye usually, whereas the yellow is usually a sort of tempera. It's something that goes very, very, very rapidly. So you get very distorted colours. So when you look at a tapestry, you think, oh, that's unusually bold colouring. Well, it isn't. It's what's left, not what the artist's intentions were. What is now called medium responsivity is things like some photographs, watercolours, most textiles. And that's the sensitive, what we used to call sensitive ones, 50 lux minimum, or 150,000 lux hours. And again, that's 3,000 hours at 50 lux. Now, if you have 2,000 hours, you could light it to, say, 75 lux. And I've had some, certainly the National Trust used to only open for limited hours. I used to do some lighting, in fact, for about 20 years, I was lighting bits of Waddesdon Manor in Buckinghamshire. When I started in the late 1980s, it opened for about 1,200 hours a year. So the duration of any lighting was very, very low. It only opened 4.5 days a week, and only for about 26 weeks a year, and it shut for whole the winter. And slowly that's increased and increased and increased, and now it's open for about, I think, 40 something weeks a year, every day of the year, 10 a.m. till as late as they can do it. So very different. Now the new category, which some curators conservators haven't really got their heads around, is this one here, which is some silks, some other odd dyes and peculiar things, which are very, very, very sensitive to light, and they will fade as soon as you expose them very rapidly. Now, still 50 lux, because if you don't light at 50 lux, or 40, 45, 50, you just won't see, or most people, not us, like us young, sprightly people have good eyesight. But the ageing population, especially people, typically the profile of people going around National Trust properties, the typical age is about 50, I think 52, 55. Eyesight is not as great as a lot of the youngsters, and they just cannot see detail. And if you don't light 50 lux, a lot of the audience will not be able to access the objects. They won't be able to see the detail, they won't be able to see the colours. So 50 lux is a minimum. But with a 15,000 lux hours limit, it means you can only light these objects for about 300 hours a year. So you've got this wonderful silk dress, Victorian silk dress or 1920s silk dress. You can't permanently exhibit it at 50 lux. Now the ways around that are you either need, hopefully, to have 3 beautiful similar dresses you can rotate onto display and back into boxes in the cellar. So you're immediately reducing the exposure on each of these 3 dresses by having them in darkness most of the time. So that's sometimes possible. Otherwise you can do things like having movement detectors or presence detectors, in front of cases. So when you walk up to a case, the lighting dims up. Because it doesn't need to be at 50 lux when no one's looking at it. It can be down at 10 lux. So we've done that in a couple of places. We did it over at Western Park Museum in Sheffield a few years back, where they got a native Indian, Native American shirt, very old, very rare, and that is lit generally at about 10 lux, so the case doesn't look dark. If it goes off, people just go, oh, case is out, I won't bother to go over to it. So having it just dimly lit at 10 lux, people at least will go over to it, and then the light comes up. And I think it actually comes up to about 60 lux on that one. But over a year, the overall exposure is much, much lower than being lit permanently at 50 lux. And we also did a similar, a different shirt, but a shirt at Leeds City Museum, same technique. And you need to be very careful to make sure that the movement detector just detects around in front of the case and doesn't pick up people wandering past and just triggers every 2 minutes just because people wandering about. But a very good technique. And indeed, some people, other designers, have done it for whole rooms. You know, if you have a number of rooms in a little museum that has only a few hundred people a week coming through, there may be hours when no one comes into a gallery. So all the lighting can dim off. You know, and you have presence detectors generally, hopefully just outside, so when they walk up to this gallery, the lights are ready when they walk in. So that's, again, a very good energy-saving technique, as well as a very good conservation technique. So well worth thinking about that one. We go through a bit more technical detail on UV radiation. UV is not useful in terms of vision, so if it can be filtered out, great. Most LEDs we have at the moment, or indeed every LED we have at the moment, has no UV. So LEDs are wonderful for museums and galleries. You've got no UV to worry about, no energy in UV, because UV energy is very, very degrading for objects. It's a more energetic end of the spectrum. So anything off this blue end is damaging. You may occasionally hear people go, oh, terrible, LEDs got blue light in them. Well, so have fluorescent. Fluorescent's always had blue light in it, as have LEDs now. So fluorescence, same problem. Use controlled daylight. Again, we go through various techniques of trying to put in louvers, baffles, blinds, and we give many different examples of that. These are typical external blinds and internal blinds. External blinds are good in keeping heat and light out from gallery space. You're stopping solar radiation outside. Can be a maintenance problem. You get the odd pigeon wedged in them and things like that. Not great. A lot of the maintenance people don't like them for that reason. Internal louvers don't have the pigeon problem, but obviously the heat comes in, so that's why that big hole is there with a whack and rake fan in it, because this is effectively a little greenhouse, even with the blinds in. So again, curators don't like the galleries below heating up, so they don't like the space heating up either. And you can see here, these are the daylight sensors that look up at the louvers to adjust them as daylight shifts around. This is a typical example of window blinds, very simple system. Very common in National Trust properties. This happens to be the Holborn Museum in Bath, not one of my jobs. This is Kevin Shaw lighting. And it's quite typical, I say, for National Trust properties where you have one vaguely see-through blind that you can sort of moderate light with but doesn't look blank. And then you have behind it a blackout blind which doesn't need to be black. A number of people think, oh, it's blackout blind, I have to have it black. You don't have to have it black, you just need to have it opaque. So these are white blinds, white opaque blinds behind a white sort of sheer. And it means you can juggle them to moderate the high bright sky, or start bringing the blackout down if it's really bright. Even on a sunny day you can drop it like this so that you've still got a bit of a view out, which a lot of sort of stately homes, you've got a beautiful vista down the, the avenue or the lake or pond. You want to keep views out sometimes. And obviously out of hours, as soon as the last member of public shoved out the door, the room stewards will go around and they'll pull the blackout blinds down. So that's reducing the impact of daylight straight away. And similarly with these sorts of systems, if they're set up properly, come 5 o'clock, there's clatter, 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 all the louvers shut. That cuts out daylight, sunlight, and is a slight extra security measure as well. So all very useful. This is from the Tate Modern, not one of my jobs, but it's just illustrating one problem you can get with windows. Even though these windows are quite heavily, use the word dyed, they have a tint, a very strong tint, so they're neutral density glass. There is still quite a problem with viewing dark objects when your eyes have got a very bright view across the river to St Paul's Cathedral. So you've got to be very, very careful with this problem. It is nice to have views out. Generally, people try and have them in the circulation or coffee space and outside the galleries, or you need to treat them very, very carefully. Selection of electric lighting. We go through ratios, how to get emphasis onto objects, put light onto objects, not the backgrounds, try and put the light where it's useful, rather than just sort of generally lighting up bits of empty space. Choice of lamp. Choice of lamp these days tends to be which LED lamp shall I use, but there are other places where metal halide could be a possibility, or fluorescent could be a possibility. Because a lot of sort of T5 fluorescent lights are as efficient as most LEDs for certain purposes, but LEDs are very rapidly taking over every role in a museum or gallery. And as I say, at Chatsworth, all the recent work's all been LED, very high colour quality LED, I should say. But we still have some areas we did sort of 4 or 5 years ago, which were tungsten halogen. We're now going to have to start converting to LED. But there we go. More work, terrible. I'm whizzing through a bit now because I'm aware of the time. LEDs, this is a bit historic now. We used to have, when I did this last year, there were still people saying, oh, you can't use LEDs in museums. They're not good enough. Yeah, they are. Sorry, they're fine. National Gallery, National Portrait Gallery, London, Birmingham Museum and Art Gallery, all LED, all the new stuff anyway. Everywhere, every country, whether it's in Berlin or Toronto or wherever, all the major leading museums and galleries have carried out their own trials with various LEDs, usually country specific. They're fine, and they've adopted them wholesale. There has been a proper peer-reviewed bit of research which has shown similar paintings to groups of people. Do you like A, do you like B? And then sort the lighting around, do you like A, do you like B? And all that sort of thing. Looking at tungsten and high quality LED, and the researchers expected there to be a bias for the traditional tungsten halogen. In fact, they found there was a bias the other way. Viewers, whether they were amateurs, in other words, just people coming into the museum to have a look, or whether they're curators or other professionals, preferred the ones lit with LED. So there's no case to be made now, really, for using LED. Local job, there we are. Did this 2 or 3 years ago. It's the Birmingham History Gallery. If you haven't been, you should. History of Birmingham from swamp to now. Very good exhibition. All LED throughout for the house lights. Case lights they're fibre optics, but they've got a LED projector. All the map lights, all the lights built into structures, all the lights, all the spot, everything LED. And over the last couple of years, they've been rolling out LEDs gallery by gallery as they refurbish them. So it's good for Birmingham. This is at the other end of the scale. This is American Museum in Britain, which is just outside Bath. and this room has 18 2-watt LEDs to light the entire room. Different beam angles, so we've got sort of narrow ones, we've got wide ones, we've got ones with an oval beam which light this information stand along the front here. And the thing that excited the room stewards most was the lighting of this information stand. They were ecstatic that you could actually read it for the first time in 20 years. You know, oh, come, Deirdre, come look at this, you can read the information. Oh, fantastic. But also the room looks pretty good. But there we go. And we're doing this room by room as money becomes available. This is also American Museum. It's purpose-built cases to put their silver collection in. And we experimented, good practical experimentation with different colours of LED and different types of LED. And what we ended up with is a cool LED, which worked very well with the silverware, and a thin linear strip up both sides, which unless you stick your head against the wall like this photograph here, you can't see. And it lights, it puts streaks down the edges all around the sides, so you can see all the contours of the objects. Worked very, very well, that. And a good example of experimentation working. This is not too far away up in York. This is a Merchant Adventurers Hall. This was done nearly a decade ago. All LED, well, more than a decade ago now. All LED, very early LED project we did. And these paintings at the back here is lit with one 2-watt LED. And that one has two 2-watt LEDs on it. And those have one 2-watt LED with an oval beam lighting two paintings. So it's very, very, very economic, because you're not trying to floodlit that painting. They used, when I first looked at this room, there were sort of strange black squares on the wall. These were famous citizens of York. You couldn't see them, they were just black squares. Just putting a small amount of light on each one just brings them out into the room. So useful technique. And the lighting, of course, this is a Grade 1 listed ancient monument. We weren't allowed to touch anything or screw into the wood, so we have clusters of LED lights sitting on or fixed to a metal pan that sits on top of the beams, so it's not fixed into the beams. They light over each side. All control system, so we had a scene set control system 11 years ago, whenever it was. So again, you occasionally get people say, oh, LEDs are so difficult to control. No, if you do it right, they're not at all difficult to control. So even 10 years ago. Showcase lighting, there's a whole section about showcase lighting. Again, some of you will never ever get involved in showcase lighting. I tend to, I've dealt with showcases of all shapes and sizes over the years, and with most case manufacturers who are nearly universally abysmal at putting lighting into cases, even though they make them. They tend to be very, very standard, single beam angle, and I specify no, we'll have, you can take the lenses off, you can swap them around, and I want narrow beams, I want wide beams, and all this sort of thing. And again, we take you through in the guide how to do various techniques and illustrate some different techniques with using, these are all fibre optics, these ones with spotlights within cases in typical arrangements. One's bouncing off a mirrored lid, so the light travels up, hits the glass, comes down again. Some exhibition designers like it because you don't then have a light box on top of the case, it just looks like a glass box. So watch out for that one. There are peculiarities, you can't have objects that stick out because otherwise you don't get the light passing and coming back down. Bottom lit, very unusual. Only just worked in this particular case, I think. And again, a more traditional downlighting technique. Lighting where we've got book stands. This is over in Bolton. I can't remember now. Begins with B. Where we're lighting books. And obviously you don't want to light them so you get a dark shadow in the middle. So we're lighting straight down to get into the middle of these books and to light them very uniformly. So that's specific for that purpose. But still putting enough light onto the descriptive information panels at the back. So you need to make sure the information can be seen. including text, things like that. This is an unusual case where some of the objects are in front of the glass and some are behind the glass, so they've got some spilling out, as it were. And again, it's a matter of trying to get the lighting levels fairly uniform between the gallery space and the case as they merge together, and getting the lighting levels very roughly right, where you've got objects that are lit, certainly here, at 50 lux, to objects that are irresponsive to light, and you've got a whole range of materials, mixed media it's called, very popular. And this is an example from Manchester, very typical sort of mixed media case where you've got a silk dress, and this is before the days of the highly responsive category. That was lit to 50 lux. That was lit to about 150 lux. That was lit to 50 lux. And so in this one case, you have objects lit from 50 lux to 150 lux. And again, that's sort of magic 3-to-1 ratio. So when people come in and look at that case, they can perceive it as being evenly or fairly evenly lit. Obviously, if you stand and think about it, you might think, oh, that's a little darker than that. But it's only a little darker. And we tend to perceive a 3-to-1 difference as being uniform-ish. So 3-to-1 works well. Go much beyond that, and you there's a splodge here for some unknown reason. It looks brighter. So, and your eyes drawn to it. Lighting controls, we whiz through. I'm whizzing you through it. Sonia's standing up. Not bad sign there. All the different sorts of controls. Controls can be very difficult to get right. Giving enough control, hiding the controls so kids don't poke it. We try and encourage kids to be interactive with the exhibitions, go around, push buttons, pull things, and then you moan at them for pressing the buttons on the wall that turn the lights off, So you often find little boxes being put over light panels, or they're hidden away, which is much more sensible. Whole building controls, big issue, big problem. We have got, quick plug, a new lighting controls guide coming out very shortly. So the lighting guide 15, I think. I think it's neck and neck with retail lighting, another new guide, new plug. And whoever gets there first will be called LG8, I think it is. So very exciting in the Society of Light and Lighting. So lots of issues with controls. We sort of go through those bit by bit. Different types are better for different buildings. Varies. How to label them, so people, because a lot of times you've got the cleaner coming in. They press a button called cleaning. You've got access. Sometimes you have boost, which I think boost number 2. That's when the mayor visits. You press the boost button, all the lights go up illegally for an hour, and then you put them back down again. Not every museum wants that. And sometimes for corporate entertaining you do that. So corporate entertaining, it's down at 200 lux, all very carefully controlled. Come the evening when you've got the big party, whoa, all the lights are on, it's all exciting for 2.5 hours or 4 hours or whatever it is, once a fortnight. Usually, okay. Museums and galleries must comply with Part L. Some exhibition museum designers still don't understand that. You've got to control the amount of lights. Generally, with lighting that's called display lighting, as defined in Part L, which is most exhibition lighting, it's fine. It can have a higher energy use. Again, with LEDs, that's not now a problem, but it should go off when the last visitor leaves. Same with shops, in theory. And yes, you can place lights above 3 metres. I had a council client that said, "Oh, we can't have lights above 3 metres." And this was over in, not Burnley, somewhere like that, in a Victorian gallery where all the ceilings were at 4 metres. And I did win my case that he was in the we can't use ladders, they're illegal, and you can't go above 3 metres because that's illegal as well. And no, it's fine. Do it safely. Out of hours lighting. Again, not so vital these days, but where this used to be, this has changed now. It's over in Manchester, the People's History, when we did that, lots of very delicate old union and workers' banners, national collection. lit 50 lux during the day. Come 5 o'clock, press a button, and the lighting on the fragile displays all goes out, and you're left with walkway lighting, lighting cleaning, access, bits of maintenance, things like that, but you're not lighting the delicate objects. So very, very practical, simple system. Appendices, 10 pages detailed recommendation. So if you've got a particular object, metal, how much light can you put on a metal? Well, the answer is if it's brass, you can put as much as you want on it. If there's a ribbon attached, you can't. You put 50 lux on it. So there's all those practical issues. So there's lots of pages of archaeological objects, all sorts of weird stuff we cover. Heating effects, again with LEDs where you haven't got any heat in the beam, it's not such a problem. So that's it really. So summarise, get the right light, right type of light in the right place, aimed in the right way, probably for the right duration, and you should just about do it. Quick advert. This is what's coming out next few years, outdoor retail, and the one I haven't put in there is the lighting controls guide. So there we go. Thank you very much. Got any questions? Oh, stand silence, I like it.
Can I ask a question for me?
Yeah.
In a slightly adjacent subject here, stained glass windows, which you often see in buildings like that. We've got one at the school when I'm school governor. What's your advice to the best way to make a feature of a stained glass window?
The answer is incredibly difficult. So I do some church lighting, and often someone will say, "Oh, we've got this beautiful east window. How do we light the stained glass east window?" And the answer is you light it during daylight with a huge white sky behind, or blue sky behind it, because the glass, most glass, unless it's featured, will only have colour in it when the light's coming towards you. So if you stick a floodlight outside on the grass and aim it up, you will throw the colours onto the ceiling. You don't particularly see the colours when you look at the window.
Let me help you out slightly. This was on the outside, it's had a corridor built behind it, and so
right.
it's got a corridor probably the width of this,
Right.
which is then got daylight, stained glass window.
Much easier. But what I tend to do, if it's practical, is light the wall opposite the stained glass. So if you've got a corridor with the wall on one side, stained glass, and the room here,
Well, that's all window there. So in the daytime,
it's fine.
in the daytime that's fine. The daylight comes through the window there, across the corridor,
Yeah.
and lights it up sufficiently to be a feature.
Well,
in
you
the
may-
evening, it's an area that's used in the evening for functions and evening.
Right.
You know, we're looking for a way to.
It's a very good place to do some experimentation. You might get away with, depending on how the windows are, of putting lighting at high level above the windows to light down, because then at least you'll, for most of the room, you'll get the effect of the stained glass. Of course, and also the light in the corridor will bounce around, so it's not quite, it's like a giant light box to a degree. And daft things like, obviously the windows at night will be a dark black panel. If you had a light blind, just pulling the light blind down, or Venetian blinds, if your stained glass window was here and you had your corridor lit, then effectively you're looking through the stained glass at that white wall behind. You'll see all the colours very well.
Somebody was trying to suggest you just put an LED wall right behind it.
No, because it'll just bounce off. Because with glass, if you remember sort of your physics, if you've got an angle of anything here, it'll just hit the surface and bounce straight off it. You need to go beyond that critical angle. I can't remember the Rylance number or something for glass, where it'll actually go into the glass.
Okay.
So that's all to do with refraction. So no, that's probably the work. Putting the LED on the other side might work, but I would try and borrow a chunk of LED strip and get someone to very carefully stand on a chair or step ladder and try it out. I think that's really the most practical way of doing it. Bit of fiddling, all good fun.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
So In retrofit applications, then, what sort of problems did you have in terms of finding places to put the LED drivers? Because they're not exactly small, are they?
No, it varies project to project. Where you've got little tiddly LEDs, like in National Trust properties, then yes, you're running wiring back to a little driver somewhere. In that example with the Great Stair at Chatsworth, we had door cases which were carved doors. I mean, the doors were 1 point something wide, 2.5 metres high, and they had a sort of big carved thing with a bust on the top of it and lots of curly wiggly bits. So we had plenty of room to hide drivers. And what we did there, we had a metal tray, curved metal tray, and then a little metal band going down where the LEDs were fixed to, out of sight, and then the wires taken back to the drivers on top, with a little dimmer adjuster. Because we didn't change the fixed wiring, so the staircase is on and off. But there's some little adjusters which adjust the drivers to get the lighting set right, because we don't want to overemphasise the busts on the wall opposite or overemphasise the ceiling. It's getting that balance right. Because there's almost no daylight in that stair, so we could set it as we wanted it, which is good. How many people here have ever done a museum or gallery, just out of interest? How many want to? Going to run away now. They're all good fun. But also, a lot of, this building has odd places, there's pictures down the corridor. You get a lot of foyers and entrance halls have paintings or tapestries or works of art stuck in them. And some of the same principles apply to those as apply to big gallery spaces. So it's quite interesting to think about not just I've got a statue, I'm going to stick a floodlight in front of it. It's to think if I floodlight a face head on, does that look good? Now perhaps it's better to like in a theatre. If you think of a theatre, they don't have many floodlights right in front of the actors. They're over here and they're over there, and that's because it gives much better modelling on the face. So, say for most statues and 3D objects.
So coming back to exposure, is white light the right colour light to be using, or if you used a different colour, would the effects of exposure be reduced? And if so, what's the impact then on the colour rendering associated with the ability to see the actual thing being illuminated?
Well, it is. A number of people have done sort of this. Big museums that have scientific departments have done studies where they say, this particular type of green silk is better if it's illuminated with a light that doesn't have this bit of the spectrum in it.
Sure.
And that's fine for that one object. But the slightly blue silk dress next to it doesn't have the same spectral response and therefore has different dyes in it, because you can get the grey here in this shirt and the greyish of these jeans. It's not the same mix of dyes in both, so they might look the same, but probably if I stood at the other end of the room under the fluorescent lighting, these greys would shift because they haven't got the same dyes, and they won't respond the same way. And if you expose these two to the same light for the next 20 years, they'll fade at different rates. So, although I say, you occasionally get some, Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto come out with a study on blue certain dye type in materials and say, it's much better if you do, cool LEDs rather than warm, or the other way around. That's fine, except if you start mixing different light sources in one space to light different objects, everyone's going to come in and go, there. Weird, if the problem if you start getting different, like we have here, warm and cold fluorescent tubes, you immediately see the differences, and people just go, wow, this is weird. So I think it's overruled in a sense by having a consistent quality of light throughout a space. You could have a slightly different one in a room set aside for, say, watercolours, which you often do in museums. You will have lots of well-lit spaces, and then you'll go into probably a little chicane into a darker room. That chicane is to try and adapt you slightly into the darkness to go into a space where you've got 50 lux instead of 200 lux. So you can have a different colour there. You could have a, if you got something in there that's a lot of bluey, greeny ones, you could have a warmer light that has less blue and green in, so they won't respond so much. But then the colours are going to shift, and I think in practical sense, it's difficult, possible but difficult.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, just like to thank you all for coming this evening, obviously taking us through Lighting for Museum. So just thank them in the usual way. Okay.